Yo, peddlers, welcome back to the podcast. This is your host, Norby, and I hope you enjoy this next episode. Ben, welcome to the podcast, and thanks a lot for joining me on this next episode of the Paddler Podcast. I would like to get started with a short, quick introduction of who you are, and a little bit of your background, of what you've done in your career so far.
Yeah, good morning, Norbert. Thanks very much for having me on. The sun is rising here and it's an early start, but a pleasure to join you. Yeah, so I guess to give you a short kind of background of myself, I'm from the UK, as you can hear. I've had about 20 years, approaching 20 years in the sports communications and media relations industry.
Okay.
So I started off my career, I played a lot of racket sports when I was younger. So I played a lot of tennis and a lot of squash, which was, an even bigger sport when I was growing up than it is now. And I then kind of from a career point of view wanted to move into either journalism. I certainly wanted to work in sport, but it was either journalism or more from the PR side of things. And eventually I went for the latter. So I started off my career in the ATP in Florida, in their office in Florida.
Okay.
Which was fun. So I did an internship there to kind of start off my official working life, I guess.
Okay, cool.
Which was a great.
I went to school.
Experience.
I went to university neither. Just so we cleared that up. I went to UNF. Yeah, so that's near Ponte Vedra, right? That's where the office is.
Correct. Yeah, no, I remember it. I remember that era really well. So yeah, I had a great time. Yeah, great part of the world. And that was a good foundation for me. And I then went on and started off my career in London and spent 3 or 4 years there working on the sports agency side of things. So working in sports PR agencies, marketing agencies, working with different clients in different sports, helping essentially promote them. And yeah, I worked with NBA Europe. I worked on some pre-Wimbledon tennis events. I worked on a magazine, various different clients I had. And then I decided I've always been someone that loves a challenge. So I decided to move out to the Middle East, to Dubai. And the market was it was around 2008. So there's the kind of global financial crisis was just happening. The market in the UK wasn't good. The job market wasn't good. So I decided to move out to Dubai, where there was a lot more, the economy was more buoyant, there was more opportunity. And I spent a couple of years of my life out there working as 2 things really. I worked for a company where I had 2 hats. One was as head of press, head of communications for the Dubai Tennis Championships.
Okay.
And that was an ATP and WTA big tour event. And that was looking after everything from all the player PR, all the strategy side, looking after the press office, managing the journalists, making sure everything, went well from a communications point of view. And then I also had a hat where I was essentially press officer of the Emirates Dubai Rugby Sevens, which is a huge event out there. And yeah, a massive kind of festival of rugby, really. So I had, a phenomenal couple of years out in Dubai. And then I moved back to the UK and then spent some time in motorsport in Formula One.
Okay.
And I worked with a team which was then Lotus Renault. It's now the Alpine team. So it's based in Oxfordshire in England. We had drivers like Bruno Senna, who was nephew of Ayrton, of course. We had a young Romain Grosjean, who everyone knows now, and obviously survived a very close, near-death experience a few years back on the F1 track. And we had Nick Heidfeld. So we had some well-known names as drivers, and that was fun because it was. I'm not by any means a petrol head. I'm not a motorsport guy, but I wanted to do something totally different, just to get to know a different sport and see the different culture and see how it worked.
So you've been in the sports industry. You've been around athletes of different types for the majority of your career, I would say. And is there any difference between different athletes, by the way? Just a side question, between tennis players and Formula One drivers and.
It's a good question. I mean, look, I think a lot of athletes in those mainstream sports today are, they're professionals. So they are very conscious of sponsor duties, very conscious of being, coming across in the right way, having had their PR advice, having very disciplined with their day. Not to say they haven't been like that for a long time. But look, we know it's professionalized. There's some people would say, okay, there used to be more characters in sport because they didn't have the PR people around them. They didn't have the sponsor advice. They were just saying what they thought, so it was more entertaining. But they have to be a bit more careful because they're representing different professional bodies, etc. Look, while sports become more professional, maybe it's become a bit more predictable with how the athletes behave. That said, look, they're all individuals, they're all personalities, so of course they're different. I think the difference is, in Formula One, yeah, look, there's the glamour side of the sport. There's a lot of egos. There's a lot of yeah, it's certainly when I worked in it felt like an elitist sport. It does, it's a
Okay.
lot of
Yeah, for
money
sure. I
involved.
mean,
A lot of the drivers, they've got there through, yes, perhaps having wealthy backgrounds,
sure.
having, opportunities that people from lower, economic backgrounds wouldn't
Sure.
have.
Yeah.
So for sure that's there. And then you look at something like tennis, and especially over the years, we've seen more and more players from the Balkans, from Eastern Europe, who've come from like war-torn countries.
Yeah.
So yes, whilst the sport like tennis has a lot of middle class credentials, a lot of, I suppose, privilege associated with it, it's also got people that are striving to get a better life from something
Yeah.
they've from coming from very little. So there's definitely differences with athletes in different sports.
Okay, cool. Cool, good to know. And I mean, you've got now then going into the next topic, you've got your squash and tennis background, which fits quite well into what you're doing at the moment in terms of which sport you're involved with, which obviously is paddle. I'm gonna give that big secret away. So tell us a little bit on what you and your team are doing and building within paddle at the moment.
Absolutely. And what I'll do just before actually is just to not miss a big chapter. I kind of, after working with those athletes in Formula One, etc., I then got a big opportunity to go and work for WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, which became very much under the microscope because of the Russian doping scandal. There's a film called Icarus, which won an Oscar, which is all about that saga.
Yeah.
And it was a fascinating 4 years. So that was dealing with the media relations for all of the doping scandals, all the state-sponsored doping stuff you would have heard about. That was our responsibility as an organization to be tackling these difficult issues in sport. So that was 4 years in Canada that I spent, and then I subsequently did some time as director of communications with the Commonwealth Games, which is obviously something different, but a major multi-sport event. And I did that during the Gold Coast 2018 era. So that was great. But yes, fast track. I then moved on to consultancy, and that led me into paddle. So yeah, look, the link to paddle for me was I was in Dubai actually again about 3 or 4 years ago, and my sister who lives there, I think a lot of people have this kind of intro to paddle. She sort of said, "Oh, I'm playing a game paddle. Actually, you'd like it. It's sort of a little bit like squash, a little bit like tennis. I've got a fourth person who's dropped out. Can you fill in?"
Okay.
And I said, "Oh yeah, okay, sounds good." And I'd heard about paddle, but not a huge amount. And I stepped on court as a sort of squash and tennis player, so I could hit it easily, although I didn't know the nuances of the sport. Immediately loved it and got completely hooked. And I think a lot of, it has that ability to do that no other sport can, in my opinion.
It definitely does, yeah.
So I got hooked. I came back to the UK and there were no courts, and there still aren't many courts, but that is changing. And look, so that was my first intro to paddle, and then I gained interest over the last 3 years. And then about a year ago, I was doing some consultancy, and I had a couple of opportunities working in paddle. One was I did a bit of time at Roland Garros last summer with FIP and Premier Padel. Okay. And then I did a contract with the LTA for 3 months, the governing body for tennis in Britain. And part of my remit was to look after PR for the GB paddle team around the World Championships.
So you were there, were you there in Derby as well?
So I was in Derby, correct, and then I was in Dubai for the championships itself, which was great. Great experience. And then I realized coming to the end of my contract there, and I was getting to know and work with a lot of people in the paddle world. And I just sort of spotted what I thought was an opportunity, given, I guess, my background and then my sort of passion and interest in this sport, to create a communications consultancy for paddle. And that was the kind of genesis for Paddle 22. And that was, autumn last year, so it all happened quite quickly. So I did a lot of work in the background, thinking about the strategy. What does this look like? What services are we going to provide? How is this going to look? And then pressed go on sort of early January this year. And got a business partner. I'm doing it with Harry Benyon, who's also communications background, but great paddle player, very passionate about the sport. Timing is everything in life, and his timing was that he was looking for something like this. And so the stars aligned, and that's what brought us to Paddle 22.
And so tell us a little bit what exactly, by the way, going back to, I was in Derby playing against the British team as well. there, so we've probably seen each other there, but I didn't know at the time, obviously. But yeah, going into then Padel 22, what you guys are doing exactly, a little bit more in details would be great for the listeners, I think, to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the sort of services, what we're delivering, so there's what I call traditional PR and media pitch. So that's working with clients to, essentially try and secure them coverage and exposure in the mainstream media, or it could be trade media, it could be lifestyle media, wherever they want to appear and get, a bigger audience. It's working with journalists to try and tell those stories and get media interested.
Okay.
It's also social media and digital. So that could be, developing a content plan and calendar for a client to roll out their content on Instagram. It could be, and I think this is a really important area, is actually using LinkedIn, because a lot of the Padel community are interacting on LinkedIn because it's an emerging business. So that's where they're finding, the professional sort of, Instagram is great from the consumer point of view and reaching fans, but actually LinkedIn from a professional sponsorship, deal point of view. That's a really important part. So we do, content strategies on LinkedIn, where we, work on delivering blogs or posts, different ways that they can get across their voice to the right audiences. Then there's the influencer management, which is, as you know, is big in Padel. So it's, aligning whether, clients, so it could be a club, it could be a player, with someone who's influential on social media, essentially, that has a following that might be a similar kind of target market or demographic to what the client wants to reach. So if a club needs to reach a certain type of person, let's say, and they see themselves as quite similar to a particular influencer, then maybe we work with that influencer to tell those Padel stories, and that's a way of opening up a whole new audience. So influencer management is a big thing. Video production, so creating great video content, that's, again, it's some of the most kind of compelling stuff is on video. People don't want to read huge numbers of words these days. And then it can be strategic work as well. So going to federations, if they're a tennis federation that's taking on Padel, helping them make that change. How do they carry their tennis audience, but also grow a new Padel audience? So how do they strategically, as a business, develop that? How do they structure? How do they communicate? Reputation management. So that comes back to my time in anti-doping a bit. So look, all of these businesses at some stage, unfortunately, they'll face challenges or difficult issues, and some of them will be public. So how can we help them be best prepared for that? Know how to respond publicly, how to maintain their reputations, how to come across and be reflective well. So those are all the kind of different types of services. And then in terms of the sectors, it's all the areas of Padel. So it's Padel clubs, and that could be helping them promote themselves if they're just launching their club, so they want members on court. It could be if they're a brand, rolling out 10, 15 clubs, helping them position themselves as an overall company. We're working with the tours or tournaments. For tournaments, it's essentially about getting ticket sales, perhaps justifying, why they've become a host city, for example. And then working with the players. So we're doing work with players, and I'll tell you more about that. And like I say, federations, and then working on the business side, so working with investors, business people, entrepreneurs that want to get into the sport and want to communicate with different audiences. So there's lots of sectors within the sport that we're working with, and it's very much international. So look, we're based in the UK. We both, Harry and I, had international careers, so we're focused on what I call the new Padel world. So so the new markets, the Middle East, I think, is a great example. North America.
North America is a great example. Is about to, or well, it looks like it's about to get pretty interesting. So it's definitely a great market.
I think so. Yeah. And then look, what's going to happen in, South Africa is starting to move. What's going to happen in Asia? It's like, that's such a big market. It's so untapped. Where are going to be the spots where Padel appears in Asia? And then you've got Australia. They're just starting their Padel journey, and I think they'll love that sport, because they love any sport, let's be honest.
For sure. Okay, cool. No, that's great. I mean, in the UK, definitely you guys are one of the first Padel focused communications agency. I don't know about the world, actually. Maybe you've done some research, but I think it's definitely an interesting area and an interesting time to get in and for the listeners as well. If there's anything you need communications wise, I guess Ben and the team are a pretty good option to reach out to. So we'll put that somehow in there in the video and whatnot. And
I think exactly. I think the point I'd make, absolutely. Look, in Spain and the Spanish speaking world, for sure. Look, this sport's been around a long time, so there's people doing what we do, and that's great. The the more people there are doing what we do, the
Yeah.
better for the sport, because it's going to increase its awareness.
Exactly.
Our focus, we very much see kind of ourselves as, the first in that kind of the English speaking world. So doing in those new markets where the sport's growing. So that's where our focus is. And
All right.
you found it paddle-22.com, but I'm sure that in the notes you'll
I'll put them in the notes in there as well. All right, and then let's go into then communications in general in the sporting world. What you think of that? I have, I'm not angry or anything like that. I'm just interested to see, because a lot of the communications from the bigger organizations is coming in Spanish, and I would like to get your opinion on where we stand on that, on in general in communications. Obviously, how they use TikTok. I think they use a lot of the social media extremely. TikTok, some of the players are on TikTok using it well. The organizations are on TikTok using it well. The communications part is great, I find, and very modern, and they do a great job. But sometimes the key communication project or the messages are still in Spanish. So I would like to get your opinion on that actually as well, to what you think, or why is that, or and so forth, and then just in general as well.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Look, I think it's logical that it has been in Spanish. I don't have any issue with that at all. That's where the sport has originated. That's the way of grabbing the market. However, things are changing. Okay, look at the professional level. You still look at the top players in the world. It's Spanish, Argentinian flags everywhere, and some others, but mainly Spanish, Argentinian. So look, that's going to take a while to change. But for sure, the sport is changing and becoming more international generally. So from the amateur level, there's more clubs opening in European countries, in the UK, in the Middle East, in these new markets again. So whilst it has been primarily in Spanish, the communications, and that's been logical, I think, there's definitely a need now to change that balance a bit. And maybe Spanish is still the main language for a while, but it's about kind of the balance gradually shifting. Because
I think if they want to grow the sport, I think it's because, for sure, they say, oh, we want to grow the sport, we want to be an international sport. Yes, okay, but you're communicating in Spanish, which most of the world doesn't understand. So that's where my frustration, not frustration, I'm not frustrated, but like your kind of not understanding coming from, because they want to grow the sport, grow the sport, everybody wants to grow the sport, and then yet the major things, it's like if ATP communicated in French, or I don't know what, it'd be interesting.
No, for sure. Look, it's often people work in their comfort zones, right? So it's like, oh, well, we've done it this way and people seem happy. It's like, well, people seem happy, but actually a lot more people could be happy. You can grow your audience if you make some changes. So for sure, I think it's something that, look, it needs to happen. There needs to be, cultural changes, I guess, in the organizations to bring in English language, because actually that is then going to, it's not that necessarily they have loads of people knocking at the door angry, as you say. That's not the point. The point is actually what could happen if you did make a change. So you've got to be proactive. And if you bring in an English language service where there hasn't been one, just imagine the opportunity to then proactively bring in, thousands, potentially millions more people. So it's always identifying where you could go rather than reacting to a problem. And I think that's the point you're making, is there might be some people like you, okay, where's the English language? But actually, it's actually about, if you made this change, just think about the potential. So you're working ahead of what you can achieve.
Would the sport grow a lot? Yes, probably, because you can send it to your friends. Hey, look at that, look at that, look at that. I'm never gonna send anything to my friends, because they're gonna think, why the hell are you sending me a Spanish thing? Like, when am I gonna send it to them?
For sure.
Going into that of growing the sport, or wanting to grow the sport, which we're all in the same boat, I think it'd be pretty cool, or pretty great.
Look, I think it's essential. And I think Padel has a great opportunity to look. We're kind of, I say this like to pretty much anyone I'm speaking to about Padel, is like we're going through a pretty unique situation here for, like, outside of Spain and Latin America, perhaps, but we've all grown up with all the traditional mainstream sports. They've been around for decades, 100, 150 years, some of them longer. And so these sports have just grown up and they've become more professional, but there's not been anything new. Okay, there are startup sports, but something like Padel is essentially, to us, it's a new sport that's arriving in our lifetime. So it's quite unique. and I say, yeah, when I say new, I mean it's booming now when we're a lot of us are adults and we're
But
seeing
it's
this
been
in front of
around,
our eyes.
yeah.
So it has an opportunity to do stuff differently, and it has an opportunity to learn from what other sports do well or haven't done well over the years. And I think absolutely, look at some of the examples. You look at, you know, Sandy Farquharson with the paddle school. You know, he's a pioneer with what he does, and he's done that, you know, way ahead of time, which is great. And he's, you know, I think hopefully reaping the benefits of building an audience and a community through having, you know, taken the plunge of thinking there's a market for this.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
again, it takes
Definitely.
people to like do that step ahead of the times.
Doing it for a while now, right? If I'm not mistaken. So he's definitely was ahead of time, and now obviously, yeah, definitely hopefully reaping the benefits of it.
Yeah, I think it's really important. It needs more and more people like that to spot the opportunities and just have a go, because that's how the market will expand.
Yeah, no, cool. Social media for brands and clubs. I mean, I don't want free advice from you and give away your best what you guys do, you know. But where do you see the space going in terms of where I see it very differently. Well, not very differently. I see, you know, for a brand or for a player, it's obviously international. For a club, it's very local. So for me, it's kind of interesting to see for a club how they can utilize social media to their best advantage. And I would ask your opinion on that, mainly for a club, what you think on that, because yeah, as I said, it's very, 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 very local, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, clubs, you know, exactly. With a club, yeah, your objective might be, oh, we need people on court and we need them on court. You know, it's difficult, like daytime off peak hours, 10 till 4 when everyone's working or at school or whatever. So yeah, how do you do it? Look, I think for sure they still need social media presence, absolutely, because they're going to want sponsorship, they're going to want partners, they're going to want people to get involved and associated in the future. And for that to happen, where do people go? They look at your website, they look at your Instagram channel. So you need that like shop window for sure. So yes, the answer is you still need that. You still need to look, you know, have a good brand, be visible, etc. As for like how that converts into local members, look, I think there are ways you can use social media for local members. You know, you've got to do your research of who is the local community, who are the groups, who are the local influential people you can follow, who could help expand your audience. But also look at platforms like, you know, Facebook has community groups, etc. That's much more localized. So you probably have to be a bit more creative with how you're using social. I think from a kind of non-local point of view, the benefits are enormous. Again, you have that shop window, so you're showing who you are from a perception point of view, but then you can reach markets which aren't geographically around you. So like LinkedIn I'll preach all day about some of the benefits of LinkedIn, because you can reach the professional communities, you can do your research on who are the companies to follow, who are the individuals who are making inroads in this community, how can we work with them, and you know, and start to put out, it's not just about connecting with people on LinkedIn, it's about articulating what you're doing in a non-corporate way. So it's all about storytelling, really. So how can you tell a story? How can you give some interesting information that someone hasn't heard before? How can you add value to them? And by association, that will reflect well on you or your brand if it's useful. So it's about being a bit more subtle. But like LinkedIn is good from a non-geographical point of view, but for a certain sector or community you're trying to reach. And Instagram, and look, Instagram's great. Look, if I look at something like the Pro Paddle League, here is 7 teams from across the States using a well-known American franchise formula that's less common to you and I in this part of the world, but is, you know, has been done for the MLB, NBA, etc. And they're starting their journey and they're going with 7 teams. And right now they don't have the 7 headquarters. They're playing in Miami. They're playing in Tampa, Florida. But in future years, as I understand it, they want to have their own traveling around circus type thing. So how do they build a community in their home cities when it's essentially quite abstract right now? They've got a team, but there's no home. So they're going to have to build a fan base, you know, Las Vegas, San Diego, wherever it might be, build a fan base and grow this sport that most people in America don't know yet, and grow this kind of bond between team and city. You have to be really creative how they do it, because there's nothing physical necessarily. Some of the cities will have clubs, but there's nothing physical to grab onto. So they're going to have to use social media to build up excitement around the sport, show it through videos. So look, yeah, social media can be really good, and that I think it will come into real benefit there for something like the PPL.
For sure. Okay, cool. Now that's some great insights. As you said, it's a window shop for a club as well, and you can present your brand, whether how it's reasonably or how you manage to convert people to come actually play, as you said. That's a little bit harder to track and harder to see for an owner maybe. But yeah, it's for the branding purposes. It's I agree with you. It's extremely important to do and to do it well. And to show the people what you're about and what the club looks like and whatnot. So it's definitely important. Okay, cool. And what are you doing for some of the players that you're working with in specific? How you help them, or how can I support that help? I don't know if there's anything I can do or not, but what you guys are doing mainly as an agency.
Absolutely. Well, we'd love to do some more work with players internationally, players in Europe, players in Switzerland. So yeah, look, I think there's a lot we can do from the player standpoint. Again, the interesting thing for players is, like, people have heard of the top guys, bronze, etc., but they've had to do things a bit differently, paddle players, than the other extremes like footballers or golfers or well-known athletes who've had mainstream media, who've had broadcasts, who have celebrity status. With paddle, they've had to use social media a lot to do their own work to build their brands, because they haven't had the attention from outside the paddle media. So, I mean, that's good in a way, because it means they're probably better at social media than some other athletes in other sports. But it's harder. So look, what we do with players, so we're doing some work with a few British players. So we're doing work with Tia Norton, the GB #1 women's player, and she's great. She's, young, got her whole career ahead of her. Yeah. She's knocking on the door of the World Top 100, World Paddle Tour Top 100. And she's a really engaging personality. So she's great off court. She's charismatic. And I think she'll go into some great things. So for her, it's about, and the work we're doing with Sam Jones, who's another British player, and Nikhil Mahindra from the British team as well. So we've got 3 players we're working with currently. And it's similar. What we're trying to do is grow their profiles. So we're trying to get them in front of media. As the sport grows in the UK, we're trying to use them as, ways to inspire other people to play paddle, inspire kids to play paddle. And I think they can do that. They're young people, so people relate. Young kids relate to that. And we're trying to help them again become marketable to sponsors. So what are sponsors looking for? For sure, they want to be part of a growing sport. I think they want to be part of something that people are talking about, but they want to be part of a success story. So if those players are competing well, if they're good personalities, if they can be good ambassadors for their own brands or products, then it's about getting these players on LinkedIn, getting them out and, making them visible essentially. So in tangible terms, it's media coverage, it's giving them a profile on LinkedIn so they start talking and doing blogs and writing, making sure they're on Instagram, putting videos up, showing a little bit about their life. And people like to see, intrigued about players, right? It's not always that exciting, but they're intrigued. What do they actually do compared to those of us working in an office? So what's their day look like? So it's about, it's storytelling. What are they doing in their lives? And with clear objectives. So generally with these players, I would say, they're not in a sport that is, they're not earning Cristiano Ronaldo wages. So what they have to do is try to find sponsorship to pay their way to compete in the circuit. So it's visibility, it's marketing, and it making them sort of appealing personalities to do business with.
Okay, cool. Good luck on that, and let me keep that in mind. If you guys are interested as well, Switzerland, there's not one person for now who's competing on the international tour yet, like in Great Britain, I would say. Well, not one who's Swiss. There's a Spanish guy who lives here who's trying to compete and do that. And we have a couple of juniors that are coming up. I'm running a club personally and coaching a little bit as well on the side. And we have a couple of juniors who could be interesting. So I'll keep that in mind. All right. And Ben, lastly, let's go into some of the the doping, anti-doping world that you mentioned. That's quite interesting. I find it really interesting. I saw as well there was a Netflix series or movie about that as well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, with Russia and stuff like that. It was quite interesting, and the world of that is quite interesting. So let's go into that a little bit, going into the paddle world as well. I actually have no idea where that stands within the paddle world, or what, if it exists at all, or what's happening there. But let's go into that a little bit from your side.
Yeah, well, look, firstly, I hope it doesn't exist in the paddle world. I have no reason to believe it does any more than any other sport. Look, sport today is competitive. People are trying to take an edge wherever they can. People, some people will flout the rules and some won't. So it's human nature. Let's hope it doesn't come into paddle and become a problem. I don't see anything right now, and let's hope it doesn't in the future. As for doping and anti-doping more generally, so just to give you some context, when I started at WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, it was in 2013, and the issue I was coming into was it was just after Lance Armstrong had done his essentially been found guilty of the doping regime with his US postal team and others, and had just done his Oprah Winfrey interview, which everyone probably remembers.
Yeah.
And that was the big story. So cycling was the doping sport. Everyone was like, that's where massive amount of cheating going on. It was, quite scandalous. And then it was interesting coming in then because that was the topic. But actually, in the 4 years I spent at WADA, it quickly changed. So it moved on to athletics, became the next sport under the microscope, track and field athletes. And then that quickly, from a kind of what we were dealing with point of view, that changed into Russian athletics being a problem. And then it turned into everything you will have seen in the Icarus Netflix documentary, Russian doping more widely and state-sponsored doping around the Sochi Games, etc. So it was, a hugely kind of turbulent time to work there.
Yeah,
it was fascinating. It was unbelievable in many ways. But from a career point of view, it was a great learning curve. Great to be part of, trying to manage these stories and get information to the journalists about what was going on in sport. It was kind of deeply worrying as well that these things were happening, but they were, and that's what WADA was there to do, was essentially be an authority, set the rules, try and manage it as best possible, and shine a light as well with, particularly media did a lot of that work in where doping was rife, whether it be different countries or different sports. And look, it's been around for a long time, doping, but it's taken different forms, and obviously it gets worrying when it becomes more of a regime or a sponsored sort of system, and it's more cultural thing rather than one-off athletes. There'll always be one-off athletes, but when it's systematic, it becomes a massive problem.
Okay, and in paddle, there's no system in place yet, or there's no doping checks and whatnot yet. I actually don't know.
Well, it's a good question. I don't actually know the answer to that. Look, I mean, who it would sit with, as it would sit with the International Federation, so FIP, and typically how it is, FIP or an International Federation for a sport will be signed up to the World Anti-Doping Code, which is WADA's, and they would have to adhere to testing being done in different countries, testing being done by the International Federation, athletes. Essentially the rule book would be imposed in that sport. As for how many tests and times, we never know, but it's essentially a rule book that the International Federation has to follow. So I mean, that's actually a really good question for FIP, but I imagine they're the authority responsible for the testing and for the rules.
Okay, cool. So let's see where they take that, because I've played some tournaments as well, and I always wondered whether there's gonna be any tests or what's gonna happen. Not that it's gonna make a difference for me, but I always wondered, right, how played 2 years ago, played a World Padel Tour event in Sardinia, and I mean, I didn't see anything. There was nothing of that. So that always crossed my mind on what's happening there, or what's gonna happen there eventually when that comes back to it.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. Ben, thanks a lot from my side. That would be it for the podcast. Thanks a lot for joining me and sharing your experience within the communications and PR world, where I think paddle can learn a lot. It's doing a great job, but can learn a lot and do great things with that. And I'm excited that you are on the journey in the English speaking part and English speaking world to support some of the new countries, some of the new players within the communications world, and yeah, thanks a lot for your time and for your sharing your experiences.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks for having me on, Norbert. Really enjoyed it, and look forward to speaking soon.
Likewise.